Brought to you by Dale Carnegie of Orange County. This is the 411 on Leadership podcast, where we discuss common sense leadership practices with executives in Southern California to transform you into the leader people want to follow. And this is the 411 on Leadership podcast, talking about the lesson of agility and why that's important for us as leaders. Interestingly enough, according to Forbes Insights and Scrub Reliance survey, mentioned that 81% of executives now consider agility to be the most important characteristic of successful organizations. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that and why it's important for us as leaders to be more agile. With that being said, I want to say hello to my man here on the left-hand side, as always, yes. John Campbell. How's everything, sir?
Everything's good, Steve. Good to see you. Hope you had a fantastic weekend and time with your family over the Thanksgiving holiday.
Yep, it was excellent. And let us know who brings us here today or who produces this show, Brian.
Absolutely. Well, Brian
does.
produces it. I'm John. Thank you. So as I take a sip of coffee.
That's how it looks. Just remember names left and right, because you know that is a Dale Carnegie principle.
That's right. So we are here because of Sitch Radio and a fantastic podcast producer. So reach out to Sitch Radio. Brian, our man, will get you connected. You've got a story to tell, and we want to hear about it. So if you reach out to them, there is contact information in the show notes. So please feel free to reach out to them and talk to them about that. And as always, this is interactive. We want to hear from you. So if you've got comments, questions, please make sure you leave them in the notes, and we'll make sure to reach out to that, and we'll ask our guests and have a dialogue about that too. And we always love it if you like and subscribe. It means a lot to us and helps us out to understand who our audience is. So
thank you, John Campbell.
Yes, sir. Mr. Steve Thomas.
Well, listen, we are appreciative that you're here joining us, and we're especially appreciative of the guest that we have with us today. He is Mike Richardson. He is the Enterprise Agility thought leader, speaker, executive coach, also co-founder of the newly launched One Advantage online community. Mike has always been about agility, before it became more of a buzzword now and something that it's been important. Mike's been studying the concept of agility for 20 plus years now. So, he's authors of books that include Wheelspin, the Agile Executives Manifesto, and he's also working on a second book entitled The 5 Roles of Everyday Agile Leaders, Cracking the Agility Code. So when he talks about agility and us being more agile, I'm so grateful to have Mike join us. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be here, guys.
And he is Mike Richardson. I want to make sure I get that name right. So, Mike, listen, we're excited to have you. You've been about agility for 20 plus years. Again, this is something that you haven't picked up last week and decided to do something about. This was something that, as we look at your leadership journey, agility has been your passion. Tell us about why you're so passionate about agility, and how does your leadership story feed into that?
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, it's great to be here. And indeed, I learned agility the hard way.
Okay.
All the way back in the early 80s when I started my career as an engineer working on offshore oil and gas drilling rigs. Week on, week off, helicopter out, helicopter back. Boy, does that test your agility at times. There were days when I would go 3 days and 3 nights without sleep, any proper sleep at least. Right. With changing weather and all kinds of, problems on the rig that we had to deal with. And then I did the classic thing in the 80s. I did a 2-year MBA and I got into, the general management business world in the aerospace industry of all things. And I started climbing the ladder and running businesses, and I ended up running the aerospace division of a British public company. And I noticed that, it was hard to be a leader in that situation. And actually, that's where I first used Dale Carnegie as a client back in 1996, 97, 98, and did a fantastic breakthrough program together. And then I moved to the States. I'm English originally, American now, been here 22 years. Moved to the States initially with the aerospace business, and then I ended up going independent, doing my own thing. And it took me 2 or 3 or 4 years to sort of settle into what my focus area was. But I arrived at the conclusion that agility and what I ended up calling agile breakthrough leadership, breakthrough programs just wasn't enough. It has to have that agility. And that's been my focus ever since. And as you've just said, the whole world has woken up to the fact that We've got to learn how to be more agile. But the problem is that most people haven't had any training, right? I got my training before I went out on drilling rigs.
Yeah.
I understand important things like chaos and triage and the whole unfolding journey. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it.
Well, and talk to us a little bit about, because, it's become a buzzword, especially in the last 2 years, because we've had this global impact. But this isn't new. I mean, industries deal with disruptive elements all the time. So what does that look like on an ongoing basis? Help us understand what agility is.
Yeah.
And then why is that important, not just because of a COVID pandemic, but for someone going forward?
Yeah, indeed. So I'm glad you said that. Agility is categorically not new. And one of the biggest myths that people have about agility is that it's for software companies, agile software development, and that it was started by software companies back in the early 2000s. That's categorically wrong. There's a very famous article in the 1986 Harvard Business Review, which talked about hardware companies, automobile manufacturers, photocopier manufacturers, camera manufacturers that were discovering new ways to do a more iterative, fast cycle approach to product development.
Yeah.
And so it's absolutely not new. But really what happened is the software industry sort of glommed onto agile, where the hardware industry was still glomming onto lean.
Okay.
And everybody does lean,
right.
right? Either very formal lean or very informal lean. That's called continuous improvement. And so in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, the whole hardware industry was going lean, but has now woken up to the fact that, oh my gosh, lean is not enough. I've also got to be agile. And really the definition of agility is really, it's very simple. It's the ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Now there's an acronym for that. There's always an acronym, right? VUCA. VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We live in an accelerating VUCA world.
Can you give that to us again, just in case someone's
VUCA, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Okay.
Now, when you're just emerging, hopefully, from a pandemic, of course, a pandemic is possibly the biggest form of VUCA that most people have experienced.
Right.
And before that, the Great Recession was an enormous VUCA experience, and 9/11 and all of those kinds of things. But as you said, John, we all experience VUCA every year, every quarter, every month, every week, every day. And the challenge now is, if I have agility, VUCA can actually be a good thing.
Okay.
There's opportunity inside of VUCA. If I don't have agility, if I have the opposite, which is fragility, then VUCA is full of threat.
You know, we've got a couple of people that's joining us on the chat. Lynn, thank you so much. Good morning to you. Thank you and welcome. Todd, we appreciate you. And one of the things that you mentioned, because you are in emergency management and you focus on that, is always be flexible. I believe the term that you use is a semper gumbi. I probably messed that up.
Gumby.
Gumby? Is it Gumby?
It's the Gumby reference.
Okay.
Flexibility.
Okay, gotcha. I didn't want to think too
share my
simplistically of like Gumby. I was like, but I totally get it. We need to be always flexible and always adaptable, as you mentioned. So thank you so much for that resource. If you have any additional questions, we're talking with Mike Richardson. He is an enterprise agility thought leader. Please go ahead and put that in the chat. We want to acknowledge you. So, Mike, we're talking about agility, and you had mentioned a couple of instances where, executives or people in leadership have felt like, okay, I need to be agile. When we talk about what happened, with the real estate crisis back in 2008, 2009, now we're talking about when dealing with the pandemic. I feel like there has been, once the event happens, we see realize the need for it, but then we seemingly kind of snap back to going to, things as usual. And so, what would you say are some of the things that we as leaders can do to constantly remain? I know we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but it just kind of came to the top of my mind as it relates to, we realize it's important. We realize we need to always be agile, but I feel like there's always kind of a snapback to the way things are, and it takes that next big event for us to realize, oh, wait, we have to be agile. So, what are the things that we can do to constantly just remain in that vein of being agile as leaders?
Indeed. And one of my favorite sayings in the space of agility comes from a gentleman called Roberto Unger, and he says, the task of imagination is to do the work of crisis without the crisis.
Wow.
Yeah.
When do most people do the work of crisis? They do it in a crisis.
Right.
And of course, we've all just done a lot of work in a crisis
Right.
of figuring out real fast, real big, real soon how to be agile, how to go remote, how to orchestrate our teams, how to deal with furloughs and all of that kind of stuff. So the trick now is, as you've said, not to lapse back into, well, we wipe the sweat off our brow. We got through that.
Right.
But is now to keep tapping into imagination. The task of imagination is to do the work of crisis without the crisis, to do the scenario thinking, to think about, well, what might be the next kind of crisis, not just the next big one, but what kind of crises, what kind of chaos, what kind of emergency management challenges that the listener just put in the chat there are we dealing with every year, every quarter, every month, every week, every day? And how can we bring more imagination to how we can solve for those in an agile way? And so really my bottom line when I speak and when I do workshops is the real bottom line I say to people is, look, I just invite you to become a student of agility. You are surrounded by inspiration. You can't pick up a magazine in business these days without there being a cover article about agility, workshops, and webinars and seminars, you name it. We'll be doing some things locally here with Dale Carnegie in Orange County later this month with a webinar. And then in February, we'll be doing a couple of events. So just become a student of agility because it's complex. A lot of people, in my experience, massively oversimplify it. And they think, well, we just need to go with the flow. We just need to adapt as best we can. Well, yes and no. It's more complicated than that.
So if I can drill down deeper for a second, John, if I could drill down a little bit deeper there, what would you say then would be some obstacles then of us being students of agility? I think, offhand, you had mentioned, mindset, right? It's like, okay, let's kind of go back to the way things were, or, just kind of like that the opposite of a growth mindset, right? Where we're just kind of like settling to way things are. What would you say are some additional obstacles to us being more agile as leaders?
I think there are two that I would mention right out of the gate. Number one is that agility is complicated. It is complex. To have all of the moving parts that you need that add up to an agility operating system in an enterprise-wide, enterprise-deep, or in a department, or in a team, or frankly, as a one-person operation, in your own particular role, it's still complex. It's still complicated. And most people oversimplify. That KISS principle. Can't we just keep it simple, stupid? Actually, the word I like to focus in on is the word just. The word just in agile is like the word but in leadership training and communication, right? You say to people, look, don't express, don't listen to the other person's opinion. I hear your opinion, but. Right. And the word just is the same in agile because the word just is a massive oversimplification if we're not careful. And so we've got to understand, we've got to move through the complexity of agility. It's got to be simple. When you see people and experience people who really understand the flow of agile, and that's what I study, is I study what I call everyday agile leaders in the real world. People that are in emergency management, fighter pilots, special forces, commercial pilots, and in my own case, petroleum engineers working on offshore oil and gas drilling rigs. When you see them exhibiting agility, it's simple. It's a thing of beauty. It really flows. But arriving at that place doesn't happen by accident. It takes hard work. It takes hard study to understand the complexities. And that's where the second barrier comes in, where most people have not been trained in the key attributes of agility that you have to change your relationship with. Number one is chaos. Most people have not had any training in chaos, at least not directly. I got trained in chaos before I went out on a drilling rig because I had to understand, how do you live in organized chaos, not disorganized chaos? And then the second one, which is one of my favorites, would naturally come up if we continued the conversation with the person that put in the chat about emergency management, the word triage. That is, how many times have we heard the word triage over the last couple of years? Triage is a word that gets used in a real-time, unfolding, high-stakes journey of a situation like a pandemic or a wildfire or an emergency room. And it conveys a situation where the demand for resources massively exceeds supply. And we have no choice except to triage. The trouble is in business, that's the everyday experience, right? Everybody's overwhelmed, but they've never had any training in triage.
That's a great point, because you're put in a situation to determine what's the most important thing, what has to be done. And if it's 100 things and you go, oh, it's 100 things. Well, no, maybe there's 15 things that are definite. And how do we boil that down and understand that a core of our business, and what is core and what is not? Maybe some things are, but they really aren't.
And being willing to go with the flow in that the VUCA may change in a minute. But certainly, within an hour, certainly within a day, certainly within a week or a month, the VUCA flow that's coming at us, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, that we've set ourselves for. Okay, I'm ready. Well, where did it go now? And where did it go now? So agility is a flow in which the goalposts are always moving. Accept it, embrace it, and be okay with it. And so you very quickly arrive at the concept of composure. And I like to talk about agile composure.
Okay.
What is your agile composure, your agile presence, your agile flow in the face of this crazy VUCA? And are you able to be in the face of it all sort of calm, cool, collected, and confident? That's what agility is.
Hey, we've been talking with Mike Richardson. He is Enterprise Agility Thought Leader, co-author, executive coach, co-founder of the newly launched One Advantage community. If you have any questions, we'd love to see them in the chat right now. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Todd responds, or he has a question. He's asked Mike if you've done any work with the POP-DOC, and I'm not sure what the acrostic is there, Todd. So I don't know if you could just add that to the chat as well. I don't know if Mike, if you have any idea
sure what
the
that is either. POP-DOC.
So hey, Todd, if you could do me a favor, if you can go ahead, if you can put down what that acrostic means, we'll definitely get back to it. So Mike, in our conversation, I heard a lot about training and investing in training. And it's one thing for us meaning people in Dale Carnegie, we tell people like, man, we want to invest in training. But as an agile thought leader, I'm thinking, when we're talking about volatility, when we're talking about complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty, the last thing that I'm thinking as a leader we want to invest in is per se training, because all of our resources need to be invested in those things that help us to mitigate those challenges as it relates to VUCA. So, why are you so adamant as it relates to why agile leaders incorporate the idea of training and investing in training?
Well, it's very simple. It's kind of like that saying, if we were in the business of time management, which of course we somewhat are with agility, you can't help but talk about agility without ending up talking about productivity, at least. But how many times have we heard people say, I don't have time to go to a time management workshop? Well, it's like, that's a catch-22 that you're going to live in forever. You're going to serve a life sentence if you're not careful, just trying to survive. And so you've got to make an investment to get out of that day-to-day sort of, catch-22 that you're in. You've got to make an investment to get training, to look at things differently. It is a mindset thing. It's a skill set thing. It's a tool set thing. To start launching a breakout plan, a breakthrough plan, to create a new future for yourself, a more agile future, a more composed future. But it doesn't have to be, we'll disappear for 3 days. It can be done in a few minutes, perhaps. Certainly in a few hours, a half day, seminar kind of thing. Certainly compounding over time in a few days per year, you can compound this breakthrough that you need of the mindsets, the skill sets, and the tool sets for agility, so that you're more able to, weather future storms of VUCA coming at you. One of my other favorite sayings is, when you need a friend, it's too late to make one. If you haven't been compounding, that investment, it's not there when you need it.
And I can imagine that the need sometimes to have somebody with an outside perspective, both to look at myself and my leadership, but also my organization. Because sometimes we get in the middle of it. We don't see where those opportunities and threats are. And I've always heard that, I remember studying SWOT analysis back in the 90s, and the difference between an opportunity and threat, as you mentioned, is our perspective. Because most of the times we can turn those around, because if we're facing it, somebody else is too. And if we can be agile and get out in front of it. So how important is it, Mike, to have somebody to help us walk through some of those thoughts and ideas when we're looking at agility?
Yeah, I think anything that we can surround ourselves with to sort of hold up a mirror to us in an objective way and help us see through the fog, as it were, is always incredibly valuable, whether that is an external person or an internal person, perhaps a peer.
Yeah. And
one of the things that we're working on with the One Advantage community is the power of peers. One of our partners, a gentleman called Leo Batari, is the guy that wrote the books about the power of peers. He's written 3 books now. And how do you leverage peer power in an organization? Okay. Not just external peer groups, but inside an organization. How do you leverage that peer power? And then how do you get to that culture that you want, where it's a culture of ownership, it's a culture of accountability, it's a culture of peer feedback, can help to defog, the things. And then how do you find people, a mentor, a supervisor, an external third party who's willing to really hold the mirror up and really point out that, look, you're using a lot of excuses as to why you can't be more agile. Let's just recognize, I understand that you're busy, I understand that it's hard. Yeah. If it was easy and obvious, you'd already be doing it.
Yeah.
But let's just be clear that you're a little stuck because you're using excuses that you don't have time, you're too busy, you don't know how. Well, let's go fix that.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Mike Richardson. He is Enterprise Agility Thought Leader. We're so happy to have him here on the podcast with us. If you do have any questions, again, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and put that in the chat or comments as well. We'd love to hear from you. And I believe we do have something that just came in the chat. Thank you so much, Todd, who mentions, he explains it a little bit more. He just says the POP/GOC loop is a 6-step SA. Remember, with the SA tool that combines analysis and action into a continuous process. And the analytic side of that is perceive, orient, predict. The action side is decide, operationalize, and communicate. And then POC builds upon Boyd's observe, orient, decide, and act.
Okay, Boyd's OODA loop, absolutely. Yeah. Very familiar with that. And I like to distill that down, and that's Boyd's OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act. And I like to, and it really describes the training of fighter pilots who are going nose to nose into a dogfight with each other. Other things being equal, same airplane, same speed, same altitude, same weapons. It's like as we pass each other here and we radio to each other, fight on. It's like, well, who's going to win? And what Boyd put across was the idea that, well, the person that wins is the person that has the stronger, faster, smaller OODA loop. Because if my OODA loop operates inside of your OODA loop just fractionally, I'm just fractionally more experienced at this, I'm wired a little bit better than you are, I've got more hours under my belt. If my OODA loop is just fractionally better, faster, stronger than yours, then other things being equal, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 seconds from now, I'm going to win and you're going to lose. And so what I like to do is to say to organizations, what are you going to do to shrink your organizational OODA loop? Because if you think about it, what do you go into a dogfight with every single day these days? VUCA.
Yeah.
And what's happened to the OODA loop of VUCA From the 90s to the 2000s to the 2010s, it's collapsed.
Yeah.
And if your organizational OODA loop is still out here, but the OODA loop of VUCA that you're up against every day is here, you're going to lose. And you're going to be stuck in disorganized chaos, and you're going to wonder why. And it's because you've got to shrink your organizational OODA loop.
Gotcha. Well, Todd, I hope that was a good response to your question. Thank you so much for that thought. Mike, as we are, winding down this podcast, again, what would you say, and we'll drill down a little bit deeper with this particular question, is like, what would you say is a practice, or what's that good practice that leaders could put into place in order for them to be more agile? And as you're thinking about that one practice, what does that look like for those in the C-suite? What does that look like for those in mid-level management? And then even what does that look like at the contributor level? Because if we're wanting as organizations to be agile, it really takes every member of the organization to be able to do that.
Well, over the course of my 20 years of working with so many diverse businesses, large and small, high-tech and low-tech, local and global, there's a long list of things to do progressively to build out this agility operating system. But the number one thing where I would always start is a rather boring topic of meetings. Meetings. If you think about it, in most businesses, possibly present company excluded, of those that are listening, meetings are a mess. Meetings are not a source of agility. They're a source of fragility. They're not a source of traction. They're a source of wheel spin. If you're not careful, most people's experience of meetings are they're at the very best they're time consuming, or at worst they're time wasting. But what agile leaders understand is no. Agile meetings, now that's very different to your normal kind of meeting. Agile meetings are time saving. They are chaos saving, and in extreme cases, they are life saving. They can be life saving to a business. There's case study after case study after case study of leaders who centralized their whole turnaround approach, their whole enterprise agility approach around agile meetings. And whether you're, back to your question, whether you are an individual contributor or a team leader or a departmental leader or a C-level person or a CEO, I ran daily Scrum meetings of every business I ever ran and would do so again in a heartbeat, because I know that is the central cog in the agility wheel. And of course, that is a very provocative thing to say. And that's intentional because it gets quite a reaction.
Well, talk to us a little bit, because we thank you for that. And some of the ideas and thoughts we touched on briefly about One Advantage. So what is that, and how can someone get connected with it?
So if you go to www.theoneadvantage.com, which we just launched this morning, obviously been working on it for a while, it's a coming together really of one of your good friends and one of my good friends, Jason Richmond, who's a thought-leading expert, author, speaker in the field of culture, plus Leo Batari, who I also mentioned, who's equally a thought-leading author, speaker in the field of peer power and peer groups, and leveraging what he calls peer innovation based upon peer collaboration. And then myself, being focused on agility, the whole concept of the One Advantage is the only competitive advantage that you can rely upon these days as having any permanence is what we call a peer-powered culture of agility. Everything else is increasingly temporary, increasingly quickly, probably bigger, faster, sooner than your worst nightmare in an accelerating VUCA world. Whatever you take for granted, you might have a shock coming in your direction, probably sooner than you think. So the only real thing you have is a peer-powered culture of agility. And that's what the One Advantage is all about, www.theoneadvantage.com. And come on over there and join us. We'd love to have you participate in the conversation and everything that will be going on inside that community.
Well, awesome. I'm definitely excited about it as I became a part of the community and stuff. So I definitely look forward to the information that will be coming forward there and connecting with other like-minded leaders. And so, Mike, we just want to say thank you so much.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like this has gone by way too fast.
Didn't we just start this? This was quick.
I mean, last time I remember, I was calling John Bryan, and then all of a sudden, it's time
30
to go.
minutes go by.
But we just want to say thank you so much for taking the opportunity and taking the time just to share more about agility. Because again, we feel like it's something that the term has become more buzzword-like, especially now with everything that's going on. But really, it's something that has been in the forefront for years and years upon years now. It just took an event just to highlight the importance for us to be more agile leaders. So it was just really important for us to have you on and share more about that. And how can people remain or get connected with you moving forward, Mike?
Yeah, so in addition to the One Advantage, you can find me at MikeRichardson.live.
Okay.
www.mikerichardson.live. And as I said, we've got various great things coming up with Dale Carnegie here in Orange County. We've got a webinar coming up on December the 10th. And then we've got some great events coming up in February, a one-day seminar and an executive peer group opportunity, which will be really exciting.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, we'll make sure to have the contact information, the show notes also. So if you're watching this later, please check the notes and find a way to get connected with Mike and the organization. Thanks again, Mike. We really appreciate that. And Steve, final notes as we're heading out here. Someone's looking for agility.
Well, as Mike mentioned before, we are actually having a free webinar that Mike is going to be hosting. It is December the 10th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Entitled Stepping Up to Agile Leadership and Adaptive Management. That's just a small snippet of Mike's information as it relates to agility. This is a free session. Go ahead and visit us online and register for that at ocdalecarnegie.com. Also, for those that have registered for this particular podcast, we do have a resource that we'll be sending to you focused on building that foundation for organizational agility. We'll make sure that you get a copy of that as well. And so again, thank you all so much for joining us on this podcast. Any final word from you, John, before we wrap it up?
This could be a 5-part series. That's how
absolutely.
This was amazing.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, managers light a fire under people while leaders light a fire in people. Have a great week.